Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 16, Episode 138. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Wednesday. Steelers Nation, Dave. Pittsburgh Steelers getting ready for Day 2 of OTAs. They worked on Monday. They were off on Tuesday, back at it Wednesday. Aaron Rodgers apparently expected to speak sometime later today. We'll cover that for the Friday show, but plenty for us to talk about from just the first day of OTA. So, Dave, how you doing?
All right. Happy Wednesday. I'm doing a lot better than I was the last couple of days here. I had kind of an emergency root canal yesterday, so I'm not even playing hurt. I feel like I've rebounded and recovered nicely yesterday after having that done. So I'm not in any pain this morning, which is great, either my back or my mouth. So I'm happy to talk about a lot of things that, look, we're going to have, I think, a very entertaining show today. And I don't think a lot of it's going to have to be centered around Aaron Rodgers, although we will talk about him. And it is interesting that it sounds like Aaron Rodgers will talk for the first time later today. And then, going to have, I don't know if the media is able to talk about what they observe at the OTAs on Wednesday. And then I think Thursday is a closed practice there. So, but yeah, I think we got a lot of different rabbit holes to go down of things that I want to talk about. And look, we had three coordinators talk to the media on Tuesday, so we'll go over what was and wasn't said there. A couple of players have talked since we last got together on Monday as well too, so should be a fun show today.
Dave, like a lot of veterans in the spring, is in best shape of his life season. So
Don't go there.
Better shape of his life, at least we'll say.
Yeah,
All right.
better, most recent shape of my life here.
There's a lot of terms and conditions to come along with that. But there you go. Dave, before we get into all the depth charts and what we learned from the first day of OTAs, one transaction news to share: the Pittsburgh Steelers adding another player to their roster in defensive back Tamon Lynum, a cornerback from Pitt. He tried out with a team during their rookie minicamp, making him the second tryout player to sign with the Steelers. He's a typical big, long, physical cornerback, played on the outside, goes about 6'2" with 32-plus-inch arms, and has a reputation for being a hard hitter. Began his career at Nebraska, transferred to Pitt for the 2024 season, battled some injuries, but got healthy and impressed in rookie minicamp enough to get signed for the start of OTAs.
All right. I haven't learned a lot about him other than what you guys wrote up on him. Perhaps Will here. Look, we're not that far away from me starting my annual 90 and 30 series coming up here, which it usually ends up being 93 and 30 for whatever reasons. And I say that because, congratulations to him for getting signed. Now the chore is to stay on the roster through the, obviously let's see if he can make it to the start of training camp and how far beyond. Kids like this that get signed this early or this late in the offseason, usually bottom of the roster type players. It's good that he did enough to impress during the rookie minicamp and all, and now the chore of him picking up things as quickly as possible as we progress through OTAs and obviously through mandatory minicamp, and let's see if he can hang on to the roster for the start of training camp and where it goes from there.
Well said, Dave. All right, let's go to the start of OTAs on Monday. The media was allowed to really openly report on what they saw. Granted, it was, I think, a limited view the first half hour of practice, but the media had the ability to talk about some of the initial depth charts and lines, and we know that it is just day one and things are going to shift and change. The coaches are on record saying that we're going to move some of these guys around, but still, the opening team period or opening install period of the offensive line, I thought, was interesting and notable. So apparently from left to right, it went Troy Fautanu at left tackle, Mason McCormick at left guard, Zach Frazier at center, Spencer Anderson at right guard, and Dylan Cook at right tackle. So really a flip-flop from last year where Fautanu played right tackle. McCormick played right guard. Dylan Cook was at left tackle. Spencer Anderson, when he filled in for Isaac Seumalo, was at left guard. Again, we know things will shift and change throughout this process. Reportedly, Jennings Dunker working second team, Brock Hoffman working second team right guard, Ihana Chor second team right tackle. And so, interesting start for Pittsburgh's offensive line, Dave.
And that's one of the things that we were most looking forward to, right? What was this thing going to look like? Snap one, snap two, and then obviously as we get into more OTA stuff, although I don't know how much will be able to be reported moving forward here. I guess it's going to depend on the day and the OTA session. I think one of the main takeaways was Brian Angelico when he was talking to the media on Tuesday. Pretty much said, we're going to mix and match. We want to see some versatility here, and then when we get into the start of the training camp, probably start getting a better idea of how things might look. So it's important to go over what at least has been reported so far, at least with the first snap. I think the biggest surprise, maybe more than anything, although it shouldn't be that huge because we have talked about Mason McCormick and his history at left guard coming out of college, and whether or not we would see if Fautanu started over on the left side, would Mason flip with him? We allowed that to be a plausible probability within that, but now that it has indeed happened, I think it's a little eye-opening there. And now, like you said, I mean, I don't think they were able to report or everything that happened, in that first practice. Obviously, things could change as early as, this next practice here, but at least we have a starting point there. I think the main takeaway here, and Angelico kind of said this as well too, is and this is a common theme going back to what Mike McCarthy says. They want these guys to be as position flexible as possible, which obviously makes a lot of sense, especially when you have guys like Fautanu, McCormick, even Spencer Anderson to some degree, and heck, even looking at a guy like Dunker, who did at least move around a little bit in college, albeit most of his career played at right tackle there. You just want to see what these guys look like in other positions on top of it. So we got us a starting point there. We can certainly talk about it. We can kind of project maybe what we think how this might go in the future here, but it does kind of seem that it is up in the air overall. But I think and it would make sense at the very least, and assuming Broderick Jones is not 100% healthy by the time training camp rolls around. At the minimum, it feels like they're going to take a hard, long look at Troy Fautanu potentially being this team's starting left tackle in week one. And I do have a giant kind of takeaway between the lines of Troy Fautanu when he spoke to the media the other day as well too, and it related to Mason McCormick, and he made sure to not completely paint himself into the corner when mentioning Brock Hoffman, Spencer Anderson, and some of these other guard options and all like that. But I think if it was up to Troy Fautanu, there's a couple of major takeaways here. The first, not overly surprising, they kept trying to hammer him of about what are the prospects of moving to guard and all like that. Look, the moment that they drafted Jennings Dunker and the prospects of him moving inside, I think that's with the addition of Brock Hoffman and obviously Spencer Anderson returning, that put pretty much an end to the probability of Fautanu, at least in my opinion, of kicking inside. He wants to stay on the edge. To me, he belongs on the edge at this point. Now it's just about determining right or left tackle at that point. And then one of the bigger takeaways that I think maybe not enough attention is being put on out of what came out of Fautanu's mouth was, man, he likes playing next to Mason McCormick. And I forget what he's, there's no other player I'd rather play beside. I forget the exact quote within that, but I think there's a little something there within that whatever side that Troy Fautanu ends up on, which It feels like it's going to be, and I use that word cautiously. Feels like it's going to be at left tackle. Is it? Is it? What I think there's a high probability, plausibility that Mason McCormick maybe potentially is the left guard for this team, and then they would go about maybe figuring out the right side of the line, i.e., can Dunker do enough to be a week one starter at right guard, and then what's the status of Broderick Jones? Is he going to be the week one right tackle? Could it potentially be Dylan Cook from there? But I think this is going to be a fluid situation. These guys got to stay healthy throughout the rest of the summer and get into training camp here. But I wouldn't. I think we're going to be able to read a lot more into it a day one of training camp of what at least the left side of this offensive line is going to look like.
I would not want to play next to anyone else, was the exact quote
All right.
Fautanu said about McCormick. And
Am I
there
putting
were
too much emphasis on that?
no, I think it's notable when a player, and Fautanu not a man of many words, and so when he makes a statement like that, I think it's notable, and I think it's certainly one of the motivations of why McCormick moved over to left guard. We assumed Fautanu was going to get partial, at least, work at left tackle when you draft Maxi Honachor, college right tackle. The question was, would McCormick go with him, and would you kind of keep that pairing and trio of Fautanu, McCormick, and Frazier all playing side by side the way that you had it last year on the right side? And so you have some competing thoughts here. The value of doing that, you put Fautanu and McCormick back at their college spots. Fautanu, left tackle at Washington, McCormick, a left guard at South Dakota State. You keep that group together for their chemistry. That's the positive. That's the reason to explore that. What are the downsides to that? You're shifting multiple pieces here and trying to make it all work. You potentially could end up having Jennings Dunker at right guard, Honachor at right tackle. Two rookies next to each other is not ideal, but those are still things down the road. And Dylan Cook obviously got the first team reps at right tackle in Monday's practice. And by the way, Broderick Jones reportedly not participating in those team or individual, not individual, but those install periods with the starting five. So he did work on the side, but did not work in any sort of team session, according to reports, as he continues to rehab and recover. So it's certainly interesting. It's a big flip, but I think you have some guys that are pretty professional, Fautanu especially, that can handle the switch, and we'll see where it goes from here.
All right. There's probably a little bit of hand wringing going on around. I see some in the Pittsburgh media saying why try to fix something that maybe isn't broken when it comes to Fautanu at right tackle and Mason McCormick at right guard. And obviously conversations we've had over the years. You've never been a big fan of moving multiple players, except maybe as a result of injury. And even so, do you want to flip as many you want to flip as maybe as few as pieces as possible?
Mm-hmm.
I get all that. I'm going to withhold the hand wringing for one reason and one reason only, and that reason is James Campen. I think you've got that. We've talked about how his addition to this coaching staff and what that could potentially mean, and how he was one of the additions to this coaching staff that we seem to be the most excited about. This guy's been around the NFL a long time. He's done his share of mixing and matching of different pedigrees, and obviously has worked with Mike McCarthy in the past. This is what James Campen gets paid for. This is why he earns the bucks, and this is why he has a position now in Pittsburgh, is to figure this thing out. And I will at least give him the respect and at least the waiting period or adjustment period. If he determines that right to left, left to right, that it should end up being Fautanu, McCormick on the left, Frazier obviously at center, and however it shakes out initially on the right side, if he thinks that's what's best for this offensive line going into this season, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt out of the chute there. So I'm going to be real open to this and be more of a spectator. But look, on top of it too, as you mentioned, the natural positions of Fautanu coming out of college is left tackle. The most by far the most natural position for
Mm-hmm.
Mason McCormick coming out of college was left guard. Obviously, Zach Frazier's the center. I think an interesting thing, why don't you recap what Ray Fittipaldo had to say about Spencer Anderson, who is a guy that tends to get a little lost in the offseason wash here with all this. Why don't you recap what Ray had to say about something Spencer Anderson said last year?
Fittipaldo was on the fan this morning in reference to conversation he had with Anderson last year, where Anderson apparently was a little frustrated by not playing right guard. And now he's at right guard to open up OTAs. He played right guard his senior season at Maryland. So obviously he's been a really versatile player who has played everything, including fullback, tight end, slot receiver occasionally, but seems like maybe right guard is his preference.
All right. So, did that indeed happen? You have to take Ray's word for it. There, there's no reason not to believe that Spencer Anderson wouldn't say anything along those lines. Is Spencer Anderson maybe perhaps a little bit more comfortable on the right side than he is on the left? I mean, uh, time obviously will tell here. But I think the big takeaway here is although I don't want to sit here and write in pen based on one reported OTA practice of how things lined up there, I think there is a little something to Fautanu being on the left alongside with McCormick, and then you match that up with what Fautanu said about liking to hopefully stay on the same side as Mason McCormick. I think there is a strong possibility that we see that potentially as a theme moving forward. However, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, that's it. That's the way things are going to go there. But
Mm-hmm.
I will also say that I will, at least when it comes to James Campen, give him the benefit of the doubt of saying, look, this is the way that this thing needs to go with the week one offensive line, however it shakes out left to right.
As you said, no need for hand wringing right now, even from somebody like me, a little hesitant to start moving all the pieces around because it is so early. Let's see how this final product looks and how everything shakes out throughout the rest of the spring, throughout training camp, and throughout the preseason. Injuries can obviously have an impact. As you said, the team will look at development of young guys like Ihanichor and Dunker and see who's able to start and where guys fit best. And also, speaking of offensive line coaches, James Campen, a coach we both hold in high regard, but also Fautanu mentioned assistant offensive line coach Jari Evans and talked about who's the leader of this offensive line room. Isaac Seumalo had been that guy, the elder statesman. He departs to Arizona. It's a pretty young group, although one with a fair amount of experience. And Fautanu said Evans is sort of the leader right now. He's only 42 years old, not that far removed from being a player, and kind of compared him to Seumalo, who Fautanu called a third coach essentially last year. And so obviously you would like some player to take ownership and leadership and carry that mantle, which I think will naturally happen over the course of the season. They're all rowing the same boat right now of new coaching scheme, new system, new install, new philosophy, unlearning some of the techniques I'm sure that Pat Meyer taught and following whatever James Campen's philosophy is. So there's a feeling out period. I think naturally guys like maybe Frazier or Anderson, who knows, will step up into those leadership roles. But interesting comment from Fautanu that the assistant coach right now is sort of the de facto leader.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting to hear him say that as well too, and I was glad to hear him say it. And now you can look at the situation with Jahari Evans as being an extra offensive lineman on the roster, just one that probably isn't going to see playing time.
We hope not. If he does, well, something terrible has happened.
Most definitely isn't going to see playing time there. But this is still at its core, especially with the loss of Seumalo. This is a young group, and obviously got a new coaching staff in there. And the good thing is now your mouthpiece or your leader, so to speak, of that offensive line group just so happens to be a coach, and one that has that certainly understands the offensive line coach and James Campen after the time being spent together. So I think it is a kind of a unique dynamic overall. And as you mentioned, over time, maybe not first half of the season, but maybe on into the second half of the season, you'll have, maybe a guy like Frazier or McCormick or who knows who that player will be, because they're all relatively, maybe in the long run it ends up being a guy like Dunker for all we know,
Sure.
but it's okay with this unit being so young, and albeit they've got some experience in that group overall, top to bottom, be kind of hand led, so to speak, by a guy like Jahari Evans until by natural happenings of whoever's going to end up being the leader of that offensive line moving forward.
Right. It's a young group. A lot of these guys 25 or under, but it's not an inexperienced group with Frazier
Right.
and McCormick and Spencer Anderson and Fautanu. He's a 30-year-old vet, and he's an old soul in terms of the mentality. Kind of reminds me, I had the tweet of a David DeCastro. I know that it's tackle versus guard, but just sort of this workman-like approach. Nothing seems to bother or phase them. They both dislocated their kneecap their rookie years. They come back. They don't miss a beat. Just kind of a really cool, calm, collected approach that I see in Fautanu, that I've seen in guys like DeCastro, even Marquise Pouncey, Sayamalu. Fautanu acts like that true veteran.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, there's no reason still not. I mean, obviously, to not be excited about youthfulness combined with even though it's not a ton of experience, but there is experience. Frazier's obviously far from being a rookie in this league, played plenty of snaps. Palatano, although he, obviously missed a lot of time the rookie season, he came into his own easily last season there. McCormick's been around now. So, youthful, like you said, perhaps by age, but you do. And look, Spencer Anderson's been forced to play some quite a few snaps during his time in the league as well, too. So there is obviously a lot to be excited here. I'm really, really excited about Campen and Jahari Evans being brought in to kind of help further mold this young offensive line together.
I think you mentioned it, but just to reiterate, Brian Angelico, the OC, speaking yesterday, confirmed that Ihanachour, opening up a second-team right tackle per reports, is going to play multiple positions. So we assume that'll be left tackle and right tackle. It seemed like McCarthy squashed the idea of guard right after they drafted Ihanachour. So don't be surprised if you hear Ihanachour gets some left tackle work. Will that shift Fautanu over, or is Ihanachour going to get second team work that really won't impact Fautanu? Hard to say, but just a note. I know that some fans concerned about that. They want to keep Ihanachour in one place, but this coaching staff, from Mike McCarthy even up to Omar Khan, they love versatility. They love guys who can play multiple spots. Angelico vouching for the same, and so they want guys who can do more than one thing. And if you're a backup, you better be versatile to help out wherever help might be needed. So Ihanachour not guaranteed to start, so they want this guy to be able to play more than one spot.
All right, and then you look at a guy like Brock Hoffman, right? I mean, look at all the versatility that he has. Both guard spots and center should obviously the need arise there. So he's played some football in the NFL, played quite a few snaps up until this point. Obviously, played with Mike McCarthy over in Dallas as well too. So transition to a versatile backup role in Pittsburgh makes a lot of sense. On top of it, Spencer Anderson played all over in college. It does sound, however, like he feels like he might be more comfortable at the right guard spot. We'll see the kind of initial progress that Ihanachour can make right out of the chute. And it's up to him as that progress that he makes is whether or not he can become a week one starter. Obviously, Dunker should be in the mix at either guard spot, whichever opposite side Mason McCormick's on to potentially compete for the spot there. So yeah, we needed a starting point to at least start the discussions about. We got one. I don't think we should be writing people's names down in pen at this point, but I think when we get to that first couple of practices in training camp, we'll have a pretty good idea, at least the way that they think that they want to roll in.
Right. The perspective is key. Even though these names are familiar to us, they're new to the coaching staff. And so they're coming in blank, clean slate in terms of the evaluation of where these guys fit best. They weren't coaching Fautanu, McCormick, etc. last year. And so they're going to use the spring to really get to know these guys, where they're comfortable, where all the pieces fit. And Pittsburgh has a lot of options, and that's never a bad thing on the offensive line. It's a problem when you have too few options, when you're running out of options and possibilities, when you have an abundance of it, something most teams do not have along the offensive line. That's when you sleep well at night if you're Coach Mike McCarthy.
All right. Look, we're not the only ones kind of making our observations and starting points when it comes to this offensive line coming out of one reported OTA practice. As we stated, we're going to watch how this thing progresses. I wanted to kind of fast forward into maybe looking at 53-man roster and number of men potential or number of offensive linemen potentially kept on this 53-man roster. I think over the years with Mike Tomlin, it feels like 9 has been the predominant number when it comes to him. I was looking back to the history of Mike McCarthy, specifically in Week 1 during his tenure in Dallas. There, I think if my math and research is correct, 2 of those 4 years that I think that McCarthy was in Dallas, he opened up Week 1 with 8 offensive linemen on his initial 53-man roster. 2 other times, I think he had 9 on there. So my main takeaway there is I don't think many people were going down that road, but barring injuries or something impacting and having maybe to keep an extra offensive lineman because of something like that. At most, I think most would agree that 9 offensive linemen will be on the 53-man roster. But is it worth the conversation at this early in the offseason? And once again, things have a way of working themselves out regardless of what plans might be there. But with the preaching of the versatility, position flexibility, and everything that rolls along with that, and in addition to maybe trying to carve out a roster spot for, I don't know, Caleb Johnson,
A fourth quarterback,
a
perhaps.
fourth quarterback, perhaps a Eli Heidenreich. Uh, for all we know, maybe Travis Homer is in play for the whatever. However you want, and rolling it back again, I think you have to at least throw in the plausibility of a fourth quarterback, even though I'm not convinced that's the way that it's going to go. But I think the main talking point being as how we're talking about offensive linemen and versatility and all coming out of at least one reported OTA practice. It feels like if these guys stay healthy and they get the versatility that they want, people progress the way that they want, it's not out of the question that Mike McCarthy might keep 8 offensive linemen, right?
It's ideal in the sense of it maximizes the roster elsewhere. And to your point, if you have a lot of really versatile backup linemen, those backup 3, then it gives you that ability to maybe only keep 8. But I have not crunched the numbers or crunched the roster spots. But when Pittsburgh's offensive line has had so many investments and feels so deep, I'm not sure who that cut would be. And that's even assuming that Broderick Jones is not part of the discussion if he's not going to be healthy enough, which he may very well be come training camp and come August cut down. So, I mean, if we assume the starting 5 that open up day 1 is the starting 5 week 1, which is certainly not ironclad, but if we just assume that for just simplicity's sake, your backups are then Ihanachour and Dunker. Obviously, they're both going to make it. Hoffman, I mean, are you going to cut? I mean, who's getting the short end of the? It just becomes tough to cut some of that, whoever that 9th guy would be.
Right, and what's this, we don't know what the Week 1 status, for all we know, Broderick Jones might have to open up the season on reserve PUP for all we know right now, right? But if he's healthy and ready to go, you would think he would be part of the group, right?
Assuming he's not traded, then
Right.
yes. We both kept 9 on our initial 53-man rosters, I believe. Is that correct?
I don't think I would have gone 8 there. So I believe 9 is the number that I had. I've got my list pulled up here. Frazier, Cook, Fautanu, McCormick, Dunker, Jones, Ihanachour, Anderson, and Hoffman. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
So if they're only rolling with 8, who gets the cut in your world?
All right, being as how I have Jones theoretically being healthy enough, I would have Cook as the odd man out.
Yeah, just tough to cut a guy like that. But obviously, Jones' health will be, really shape this room. I'm looking at mine. I had 9. I had Jones on pup, and just the assumption, just as a starting point, I had Jack Driscoll as the 9th. And so, in my world, you could cut Driscoll. It's not gonna kill you, and then keep 8 that way. So, yeah, if that was if the starting 5 was your starting 5, and then you had Dunker, Ihanichor, and Hoffman as your backups, and if Jones isn't healthy enough to be on the roster, then 8 may work. But I think we're like the quarterback situation, a long ways out from really cementing anything like that.
All right, and look, I mean Anderson, although you would hate to get yourself into the situation where you had to do it, he has, he did play tackle during his college career, and also he can function as that extra lineman. And we've talked a lot about Dunker, and although you probably don't want to get in a situation where you have to throw him in at right tackle. He has done it. He did it a lot in college there, so you have the versatility there. I think the real questionable point here, and it's going to remain a question for quite a while, is the week 1 status of Broderick Jones. I think it's a lot easier if Broderick Jones is not 100% healthy come week 1 that maybe he starts on reserve PUP,
Mhm.
and then the decision comes down to, could you cut Driscoll, go with 8, put Driscoll on the practice squad, and then bounce him up and down, up, for at least a little while if needed.
Yeah, if your backups were Ihanichor, Dunker, and Hoffman, then Ihanichor is your backup tackle, and then Dunker's backup first man in at guard, and then Hoffman at center or guard even, and then that's how your game day will go because you're going to dress 8 on game day. So yeah, the math could work, but long ways till August. Jones' health obviously is going to be a big factor in this thing. We're not going to count him out, and so we'll wait and see.
Right, and I only bring this all up because I don't think it's something that we've really explored
Mm, right.
since the draft. And look, McCarthy did it just 2 of the 4 years he was in Dallas there. So I think it's at least a plausible outcome here, assuming all these guys stay healthy. And obviously we'll watch the development of Ianichor and all. And look, you obviously have to have at least 8. Now, one of the downsides of carrying just 8 is you better hope nobody trips coming off of the bus and all, because you're going to have to dress them regardless, just so you can maximize the game day rosters of having 8 offensive linemen active. And I have not researched this at this point, being I brought it up as a topic of conversation. I'm going to go back to the last 2 years around the NFL to see how many teams actually kept only 8 offensive linemen. But and this probably wouldn't be such a big deal if we weren't talking about maybe a 4th quarterback, or uh carrying Caleb Johnson and Homer, or
Getting Heidenreich, yeah.
Heidenreich, or maybe a 4th tight end, right, or something along those lines there. So I think, even though it is way too early to get in the weeds here, I want us to be the first to throw it out there that I don't think it's totally unreasonable to see this team keep just only 8 offensive linemen on their 53-man roster, Alex.
I think the summary is if Jones is not healthy enough to be on the 53, then keeping 8 feels plausible. If Jones is, and if they don't trade him, and assuming good health elsewhere, a dangerous assumption, then keeping 8 becomes, I think, a lot tougher if Jones is healthy and Pittsburgh wants him on the roster.
All right, just remember that we went down this path, albeit way too early, because once again, you get a couple of people hurt, and you know, we'll watch what happens with Broderick and whatever here. I have it was more of an enlightening thing to me by going back and looking at what them talking about position flexibility, and then looking back at what Mike McCarthy did in a couple of years there in Dallas. And looking at trying to maybe get this extra roster spot for Ford quarterback, Hyde, and all the guys that we just named previously. I think it's worth at least having a preliminary discussion on that on May the 20th.
Yep, I get your point. All right, Dave, let's go to quarterback now, and their pecking order, a little less interesting there, but still notable to set the groundwork for the start of OTAs. Aaron Rodgers was practicing in his first day basically in Pittsburgh right after signing his, not day in Pittsburgh, but day with the Steelers after signing his contract, and so he got some good work in. Will Howard ran with the second team, Mason Rudolph, QB3, and Drew Aller, QB4. And so Howard above Rudolph is the story here.
All right, so much for Jerry Dulac saying that maybe Aaron Rodgers might be a spectator early on in OTAs. Look, regardless of what you feel about Aaron Rodgers and that decision and how this all played out, and even though you logically thought it was going to play out the way that it has with Aaron Rodgers coming back, kudos for him for being in uniform and participating in day one of OTAs. That in and of itself, regardless of what you think of this situation, is a positive, and I don't know how you can frame it anything other than that. Now, into the pecking order with quote unquote, I guess, Will Howard being the second man up. I don't want to read way too much into that because we'll see how it progresses from here. Maybe this was a situation of, all right, Will, let's see what you've learned. Let's see how ready you are right out of the chute here. But there is something at least notable in the fact that he was supposedly or reportedly the second one in, at least right out of the chute. Now, will it hold? We'll see. But that I think has a bit of notability to it.
And my understanding is Howard was technically working ahead of Rudolph during some of the phase 2 type stuff before OTAs began. I think also in the voluntary minicamp that occurred right before the draft. So this probably isn't anything new or a shift, but it is kind of the real first firm confirmation of that. And then you're really in OTAs, you're getting into something more closely resembling football with really the whole roster attending. So, as I've said, I have an article ready to go later this week that time will tell. No need to make any big conclusions or declarations or spend a ton of time guessing who's going to be QB2 and 3 and all that kind of stuff. That process will take care of itself, and Pittsburgh will learn a lot about Will Howard and Drew Aller and this whole group by the time that the decision needs to be made in late August. So I'm not going to freak out and hyperanalyze every minute movement or possibility right now, but it is good to know where Pittsburgh is at least starting. And it's, I think the overall takeaway, to summarize again, like we did for offensive line, is Will Howard will certainly be given every chance to be this team's number 2 quarterback.
Right. And at a minimum, they need to give him every shot whatsoever to, have a spot in this pecking order, however it shapes out here. Now, I don't want to go once again too big brain, thinking way too far down the line, especially in looking into next season. I normally like to try to stay away from, hey, we got a 2026 season coming up. Let's worry about 2027 the closer that we get to 2027 here. But let's, for sake of a quick discussion here, hopefully, a lot of people are saying, Florio's come out and says, not that Florio's opinion means nothing, but he does have a loud voice and it gets a lot of attention, along with several other major media talking head types there, that the kind of feeling is that Mason Rudolph should be kept, that Will Howard, if they end up rolling with 3, could potentially be the odd man out here. I do kind of wonder, looking ahead to 2027, let's say Will Howard gets cut, and let's say for whatever reason Will Howard doesn't want to go to the practice squad or ends up getting claimed or whatever, and is technically just ends up not being available to this team in 2027 as a roster spot. Then you have, obviously, you would expect to 2026 to be Aaron Rodgers' final year. And if indeed Mason Rudolph plays it out in 2026 and sticks on the roster, that more than likely could be his last season under contract. So that would technically give you Drew Aller as your one quarterback under contract for 2027 as you roll into next offseason. So that's just in the. I don't want to say that there needs to be a lot of discussion uh, uh, that far look ahead, but that has rolled into my mind a little bit here.
So the idea being they wouldn't cut Howard because it's going to leave them short going into 2027.
Not the only reason. Look, Will Howard, as I mentioned on that last show, six round quarterbacks. I don't care where other people say that you should have been drafted, could have been drafted, where they'd be in this class. The fact of the matter is, there's no getting a way around it. Will Howard was a 6th round quarterback. Period. End of story. And generally, those guys don't have too many opportunities to present their case, being long-term anything for that matter, there. So he's definitely going to have to earn his roster spot throughout this summer. But barring him just completely looking disastrous throughout training camp and or preseason, I think that, to me, I think there's a greater likelihood of him making the roster than him not making the roster.
And that's my thought too, but I know that there's so much that is going to shape and inform our opinion. We're really basing that off of not much right now. We're basing it off of his college career, which I thought was impressive. We're basing it off of Mike McCarthy's comments. We're basing it off of just the belief that they want to get a look and develop these young quarterbacks. And so if Howard goes out there and tears it up in the preseason, then he's going to stick. If he really struggles, the team will have to evaluate what it wants to do. The question will just be, are you comfortable with Howard being one snap away from entering the game? Is he ready to handle that? And the summer is going to inform that, because there just isn't a giant body of work, especially for us on the outside, to evaluate. There's really almost no snaps to evaluate from the outside. Now, the team went through all those practice snaps last year when he came back off of IR, and so they have a little more intel, but even then, that's still practice versus an in-stadium thing. It's miles apart. So we'll see. That's why I give a very boring answer of, we'll let the process play out, because we just need a lot more information.
All right. It will be interesting to see how long Will Howard stays in the rotation as number 2, or if there's a mix and match. Just things to pay attention to moving forward here.
One just quick thought, thinking a couple steps down the road that I had. Aaron Rodgers, very doubtful to play any preseason time. If he does, it'll be, one drive in one of these games. Will Howard, I assume, is going to probably start one of these games, especially working quarterback 2 right now. But I want him to come off the bench in one of these exhibition games, because obviously he's not going to start in the regular season, assuming Rodgers is healthy and ready to go. And it's going to be good for Howard to get that feel of what it's like to come off the bench mid-game, which is your role as a backup quarterback, where you come in at a moment's notice. And so I think that's going to be important for him to be in that position and have that feel, just to get acclimated to potentially playing the number 2 role.
All right, and we've talked about around 200 preseason snaps and how you would think that Aaron Rodgers, if he plays any, isn't going to be much of any. Mason Rudolph at some point is probably going to get some snaps, albeit probably you don't need a ton there overall. You could potentially go, and this is, look, I mapped this way out in my head way too far in advance last year, especially when it came to Will Howard. And if there was one huge disappointment about last season as a whole, I just think that not being able to see Will Howard any during the preseason, although he was going to be what he was, number 3 quarterback. It was a big letdown overall, and a big disappointment as a bigger picture letdown as far as the 2025 season went and all. Why not just let Will Howard open up as a starter in your first preseason game? Obviously, then mix in, I don't know, maybe play him a half, play Aller the second half of that game. And then in your third preseason game, maybe let Rudolph start that one. And then whenever you deem it necessary that you've seen enough out of Rudolph, then, like you said, bring Howard off of the bench at that point to see how he reacts in that situation. And potentially when you get into the third and final game, hey, throw, depending on how Aller has adjusted to things at that point, maybe you let Aller start the third preseason game and then once again bring Howard in for a little bit, and then maybe circle back to, bring in Howard as the backup of that last preseason game, and then for all we know, maybe you circle back to letting Aller mop it up in the final 3 possessions of the game. I don't know, but I think the big takeaway here is I would like to see Howard and Aller play probably at least 70 to 75 snaps at least each during the preseason. And yeah,
Sure.
I'm with you with seeing how Howard reacts coming off the bench in one of those situations where he hasn't had the opportunity to go out there and actually start the game.
And I just make that point because what'll happen in that scenario is you're going to hear Mason Rudolph to start preseason game, and the fans are going to be very angry at that news. So how is Howard not starting? Is Rudolph really ahead of Howard? I think the point that I would lead with is that you want Rudolph to start so that Howard has to come off the bench to get that
Sure.
that feel. And so that I just make that point because if that's the announcement, I know people will be like, oh my God, why is Rudolph even being considered? Is Howard not going to win the job? And who knows what the motivation would be for the team. But I think the benefit of Howard not starting one of these games is to get that real feel of, okay, I'm coming off the bench. It's the second quarter. I'm a little cold. I'm jumping in on this moving train. That's the life of a backup quarterback, and that's going to be good for Howard to experience that.
All right, and shame on me for trying to map it out already. Hopefully, I don't jinx us like
Yeah, you were a jinx last year, Dave. So
last year. So, but I think ideally in our heads as we sit here, May 20th, that's the way I like to see it play out.
I think certainly it'll be interesting on the training camp reps if McCarthy run things like Mike Tomlin did, or something at least similar. You have 12 reps in a team period. Usually it's first team getting 4 reps, second team the next 4, the third team the final 4. Who's odd man out at quarterback? You're going to have to probably rotate this thing in some way to get all these guys snaps. And so it's a little tough to juggle that sometimes with 4 quarterbacks and typically 3 lines. And so how McCarthy handles that, will it be days off for Rodgers or partial days, or they're going to flip-flop team periods where Aller's the number 4 for one and number 3 for another. Who knows? But that'll be the trickiness of trying to get that working.
All right, what about the rest of the offense? Takeaways coming out of what we know has happened as far as OTAs and all. People are probably saying, not so fast, my friends, Dave and Alex. What was Caleb Johnson doing out there getting some, I guess, according to a couple of clips, some first team reps and all?
Yeah, I wouldn't put a lot of stock into that because in my experience, what the clips are is that's the initial sort of warm-up period where it's just the offensive line. It's, it's just the offense basically. And then you have some quote unquote defenders, which is also the offense wearing those little beanies or caps to signify they're on defense. And you're going to rotate in different people during those situations. So I wouldn't take it to say that Caleb Johnson was running first team as in he was jumping Warren or Dowdle. It's just some of the natural rotation that happens during that warm-up period. So obviously Johnson's will still get a fair shake. Want to see him in year 2. It's a really critical second season. We've seen second-year running backs make a big jump and leap before. Le'Veon Bell, James Conner, good examples of that. So not discounting Johnson, but I really put no stock into seeing Johnson filter in with the first team.
Right. The only reason I bring that up is if we didn't mention it, people say, why didn't you mention that? And then yet that's another reason to sometimes don't get caught up too much with first, second, third reps of OTA practices.
Right. Just based on my experience in training camp, that stuff is not out of the norm for a backup running back to also split a couple snaps during that warm-up period. From other standpoint, I think offensive line, quarterback, the big storylines here. Wide receiver, we hear Michael Pittman. He's saying he's moving all around immediately, diversifying his skill set and route tree, something that Mike McCarthy talked to him about whenever Pittsburgh traded for Pittman in March. And Pittman offering some good marks for rookie Jeremy Bernard, saying that Bernard's been here 2 weeks and feels like he already knows everything, which was sort of the book on Bernard, that he was a savvy guy, wise beyond his years. 4-year guy, 22 years old, leader, professional, works really hard, smart guy, and picking up the NFL playbook pretty quickly, it seems.
All right, you put that on Twitter, and obviously some pushback is, well, what the hell do you expect Michael Pittman to say, Alex?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you're not going to sit there and trash the rookie, but you don't always hear players talk about that in those terms. And Pittman just met Bernard himself. And so, you take these things still with grains of salt. Does not mean that Jeremy Bernard's going to be a great player, have a great rookie season, but I think it's always interesting whenever a college scouting report sort of you feel that at the NFL level, where like I said, the book on Bernard was that he was smart and going to pick things up quickly and might be able to make a bigger impact as a rookie with Rodgers than other rookies in the past. And so you just file that away as a positive and see if it really manifests itself come the fall.
Good answer.
Thank you for the Family Feud response there. Anything else in terms of offense, day one of OTAs that stuck out to you?
No, just once again, Angelico, and we've heard this be the theme, obviously, and look, you want it to be a theme of any NFL team that move these wide receivers around, get them used to playing in as many positions as possible, and see who can do what, and then start getting an idea how you can formulate around that come the start of training camp.
Let's show the defense some love. Obviously, a lot of the intrigue to start the spring is on the offense with Mike McCarthy, an offensive-minded coach, the return of Aaron Rodgers, the rookie offensive picks, an offensive-heavy draft class. But what defensively? Probably learned less there. There's probably a little less to learn. But what are your impressions, Dave?
I tell you, I couldn't wait to get to this portion to talk about in this podcast, and with obviously a lot of the focus being on Aaron Rodgers and what Aaron Rodgers can potentially bring to this team, and everything being kind of, especially on the news of Aaron Rodgers, finally signing and obviously starting off OTAs and all. I am more than happy to talk about defensive takeaways and not so much things on the field. We've talked obviously a lot about Patrick Graham, specifically more so right after he was hired, and what we think that he can bring to this team and all. But have we talked enough about potentially the impact that Patrick Graham can make in Pittsburgh as the team's new defensive coordinator? Probably not. First and foremost, Patrick Graham obviously is not when you talk about top defensive coordinators around the league and coming into new situations, he's not a guy that gets mixed in the conversation of one of the, probably, if you were asked to name 10 to 12 offense or defensive coordinators around the NFL, and the effectiveness and the success. He's probably not going to be on many people's list here. I think, though, he is in a very prominent and impactful position in Pittsburgh, especially first year. Look, you have an offensive-minded head coach in Mike McCarthy now. Mike McCarthy, in my opinion, is not someone you're going to catch on any of these mic'd up segments, yelling into the headset, blitz here, blitz, whatever, those kind of things. This is Patrick Graham's role. This is his defense. There's not going to be any talk about is Mike Tomlin calling things, is Terrell Austin calling things. This is Patrick Graham's side of the football here. He is responsible for it. Moving forward, how this defense plays, on a game-to-game, play-by-play, is always going to be looked at. Well, this is Patrick Graham's defense here. This guy has the opportunity in Pittsburgh now, specifically with the experience and the talent and the amount of money on that side of the football, and what he's done in the past of doing a lot with a little in some of his other stops. Not to say that he hasn't had defenses that has had some quality in it. Patrick Graham has the prime opportunity for making a significant impact, specifically when it comes to the 2026 Steelers. And I hyper focus on that because, and I'll roll it back a little bit to the offensive side of the football here, when it looks like, when you talk about the potential second year of Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh. Look, this team posted a 6.1 offensive adjusted net yards per passing attempt number last year. It was It ended up being good enough to win the amount of games that they won. They won the AFC North. They got into the playoffs and obviously got railroaded, one and done there. Let's assume for the fact and that Aaron Rodgers can slightly improve that offensive adjusted net yards per passing attempt number to some degree in his second season with Mike McCarthy, some more offensive weapons, offensive line, hopefully, moving in the right direction, running game, yada, yada. I'm still not, and I hope to be proven wrong here. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to push the needle all that much higher. Let's say it gets to around 6.5. I think he'd be doing good to get it to that number. Best case scenario, maybe 6.7, 6.8. That's all good and well. But when you look at this team potentially being able to compete on a week-to-week basis and registering wins, what the improvements that this defense can make, specifically in the passing game, I think is going to be the biggest teller when it becomes is this team a playoff team or not. Last year, the Steelers defense posted a adjusted net yards per passing attempt number during the regular season of 6.2. Is it out of the question with the amount of talent and experience, assuming these guys play healthy, and if Patrick Graham can make the impact that a lot of people think and hope, and Mike McCarthy thinks and hope that Patrick Graham can do, can they push this number and lower it by 0.6, 0.7, get it down to the 5.2, 5.4. That will be the biggest, assuming that Aaron Rodgers does not go ballistic and return to a 6.9 or a 7.0 adjusted net yards per passing attempt number. Can gains on the defense be enough to really impact this team that, hey, at least we know Aaron Rodgers is going to do this on a week-to-week basis, but this defense is, arguably better, specifically in the past, are going to keep us in games a lot more where the Rodgers impact can maybe come and play late in games. In other words, what I'm getting to is I think there's a great opportunity this year that awaits Patrick Graham when it comes to the defensive side of football here, and specifically against the pass overall. I think how Patrick Graham does with the level of talent and experience that he has in this room, I think the hyper focus really should be more on how good potentially this defense can be. And if he can move the needle specifically down into the 5.2, 5.3 range of that key stat, that could be enough to make the difference of this team being a potential an 8-win team to maybe a 10-win team.
I really like the Graham hire. It was one of my favorite decisions that Mike McCarthy made whenever he assembled his coaching staff. Graham's been experienced. He's smart, well-respected. He's played every system and scheme that you can, and so he's malleable in that sense. What do you think Graham has to do specifically to take this defense and see that leap? I know you mentioned the pass game, but what in particular needs to get accomplished to have a more successful pass defense?
Look, we've got to see the sacks go back up. We got to see the takeaways at least equal, if not better, last year, and then obviously from the big play category there. Just overall, you've got to move this needle on the stats that mean the most when it comes to the adjusted net yards per passing attempt stat, and that means sacks, that means yardage, that means interceptions. So,
but doesn't it all start with stopping the run? Because I think I still harken back to what Carl Dunbar said. You have to earn the right to rush the passer, and that means you have to eat your vegetables before you get dessert. Sure. So you got to stop the run, and then the pass rush will naturally play off of that.
Sure, but I mean, we have seen, I guess, at times teams that are just average, just average against the run. It all comes down to what you do in pass defense. How many touchdowns you're giving up, how many interceptions, how many sacks to me. Yes, it does. You've got to get there. You got to get to the right to rushing the passer and all like that. So, I mean, it goes without saying you want to be good against the run, but and it does indeed start there. But you have got to, I think, hyper-focus on what you do against the pass, no matter how you got into those situations of defending the pass.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for Graham, can he continue and further that takeaway turnover culture that I think Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin in particular really helped develop. And it wasn't just about the T-shirts that they would hand out and all those things, although Graham touched on that. He's not a big rah-rah guy in terms of the celebration, but just kind of focusing on the habits and the details that will produce those takeaways. But Pittsburgh has consistently been tops in the NFL in takeaways, even in years in which their defense wasn't the best overall. Last year's a good example of that, a pretty middling defense in terms of production, but they were, what were they, second in takeaways, whatever the stat was. And so can Graham keep that trend going? It's going to be really critical because it is an identity of the Steelers. It creates you short fields for the offense. It takes points off the board, all the obvious impacts that the turnovers have for a defense. And Graham's units have historically been average at best in takeaways. Now, I know he's had lesser talent to work with, and that'll be a boost in Pittsburgh to have the resources and the skill that Pittsburgh has, at least on paper. But that's one of my big charges for Graham, is to keep that standard, which I know every coach says they want to do, but some are better than others, and we'll see where Graham ends up sitting at.
Look, I mean, I hate to boil this down to just raw stats, but when you look back at the 2025 defense, were they great against the run? No. Were they awful against the run? No. They were at least a middling group, for whatever that's worth. I mean, they were ranked 13th in rushing yards per game allowed during the regular season last year, and they were 15th right in the middle of the league when it came to rushing yards per play. Now, obviously, I'm not a huge fan of just using yards per carry as a stat. You've got the successful rushing attempts and all that play into that. But when you look at the pass defense for this team overall, this defense had a 29th ranked in yards per passing per game at 243.9, and in passing yards per play they were 6.76, which was 21st overall. When you look at sacks per pass attempt, they were 12th overall at 7.83%, and their interception rate was 2.45%, which is 10th in the NFL there. So, yeah, look, I mean, do you want the rush defense to be obviously better than last year? Yeah, but I mean, let's the rushing defense had its it was inconsistent overall, but let's just, I mean, it wasn't awful. It wasn't the worst that we've seen.
Right, but that's not the standard in Pittsburgh. Is not let's be an okay run defense. We need to be a top 5 run defense year in, year out. That's expectation. You're right. They were the whole defense was a roller coaster last year.
Right.
And you got to find more consistency, more level. There were times last year you just had no idea what defense or even team you were getting. You could have some really good showings, like the Colts game, for example. You had some really miserable showings, like the Bills game, like the start of the season with the run defense, etc.
Look, if they would have been better in the pass defense phase last year, they would have won maybe 2 more games, I think. But look, the moral of the story here is, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't take this huge jump, or the offensive passing game does not take the huge jump that many seem to think, that second year Rodgers in Pittsburgh, reunited with McCarthy, new coaching staff, some more weapons, yada yada, then the gains have got to come. This team is not going to win a lot of games by posting a 6.2 defensive adjusted net yards per passing attempt number once again in 2026. So
where did that rank? Where did that 6.2 rank? In terms of,
I mean,
across the NFL, was that average? Was that it sounds a little above average?
It was probably a little bit below average. It has more of a yellow orange tint to it than anything.
On the graph that you're looking at, that's the color
on the
code.
rankings.
Okay.
And look, if you want to look at just differentials, and I know people are tired of talking about adjusting net yards per passing attempt, but I don't care. It is a key component. It's a track that, especially once you get past 7 or 8 games, it becomes, the predictability of it is off the charts. If you're going to compete in the playoffs and be a team to make the playoffs, not only make the playoffs, but compete, you better have a differential between your offensive and defensive number of 1 or greater, period. And the Steelers were negative 0.1. Their defensive adjusted net yards per passing attempt number was 0.1 worse than their offensive was last year. Now, look, being right around that midline of 0 could potentially get you into the playoffs. But if you want to be a team that's going to be taken seriously, you better have a differential of 1.0, with obviously the defense being better than the offense by 0.10 when the regular season ends, or else you're not. If you make the playoffs, you're not probably going to go very far in the playoffs. So where are the gains most likely to be made, offensively or defensively, when it comes to that particular stat on either side of football? The odds are the most room for potential and growth and being better would be on a defensive side of football, in my opinion. And then that's why it rolls back to the impact that Patrick Graham, especially with the talent and the experience that he has in that unit in 2026 alone, that's where the gains can make a difference and have this team thinking that come week 17, week 18, that not only will they be headed to the playoffs, but they will have a legitimate chance of moving forward in the playoffs.
Yeah, well said. I get it. I understand the chance for growth on the stat sheet may be a little more defensively, although we got to see this offense put up more points and have a little better showing, a little more prolific and potent, explosive passing game. But I've said the challenge for Pittsburgh's defense is because when you look at your roster, you look at your team and your chances, you always look towards your division. What is our division doing? How do we win the AFC North, which Pittsburgh did last year for the first time since 2020? And the challenge is you're facing one of the best rushing attacks in football in Baltimore, one of the best passing attacks in football in Cincinnati. And I doubt that you're going to get to miss Joe Burrow twice this year the way that you missed him last year. And you got to compete with both of those factors. And then Cleveland, a run-centric offense with some improved passing game weapons with Boston and Concepcion. So that's always a difficulty for Pittsburgh is you got to juggle both those things. You got to have the best rushing attack and the best passing attack. And I think it's one reason why Pittsburgh has invested so much in their defense.
And then if you want to roll back in, kind of the early season schedule into the newness of Patrick Graham and the potential of him making an instant impact, specifically because he does have some. So look, Jamel Dean's played some snaps, obviously, in this league. I mean, you bring in backups like Sebastian Joseph Day. You obviously have Hayward's played a lot of ball. Benton's played a lot of ball. You get into the second season of Derek Harmon. You've got you hope all three of your top 3 edge rushers are healthy and raring to go in their second season. Joey Porter another year in this league. Obviously, you got Ramsey doing what he's going to do. You've got Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson have played together now. I mean, you've got a lot of clay to work with over there. That if you want to roll this back into the 2026 schedule, more specifically in the early stages here, you do have a chore right out of chute. You've got a tough New England team that's going to be expected to be a playoff team again. You play them early in the season, and then 2 of your first 4 games are those key divisional games that it feels like you've got to, this team better go 4-2 at worst in the division. So it's going to be pretty imperative to probably get off to a good start against those 2 teams right out of chute. So Patrick Graham's got a chore of getting this team ready and communicating, and communication obviously a big point of topic when they talked to Patrick Graham the other day, and that's obviously the case every year there. But you do have an experienced unit over there. They should be able to catch on to this verbiage and communicate. You would hope as long as everybody stays healthy by the start of the season there. So this is a prime opportunity for Patrick Graham. My giant takeaway here is Patrick Graham could potentially play himself into how these things go, specifically right out of the chute here. We could be talking about Patrick Graham. I don't want to put the cart out there too far, but we could be talking about a 10-year guy, if not longer, as the defensive coordinator. He really has the opportunity to make a hell of a damn mark right out of the chute when it comes to this defense. And look, all eyes are going to be on him. There's not going to be any of this who was calling plays, who had the card, and all like this. It's Patrick Graham's time to shine, and he's got it's not like does not have the personnel on that defensive side of football, in my opinion.
Dave, getting me juiced, man. I'm gonna run through a wall here. I love it. No, I love it.
Look, normally, people, Dave's negative and all that, and look, we haven't even gotten to the start of the season. But I just wanted to give some positivity here as to if you you know, because we come out of the show the other day saying, it's going to be Aaron Rodgers this, Aaron Rodgers that. Yes, Aaron Rodgers is a focus of this offense. Having this offense post numbers equal to last season is not going to be good enough. But if he can just slightly make, increase this offensive number, and no, I don't think it's going to get to 6.8 or 6.9 or 7 or 7.1 and all like that. But let's say he can get it to 6.6, 6.7. Okay. I think that's at least plausible in my head here. And if let's say you can get your defense to drop down from a 6.2 number to a 5.7, 5.6, 5.5. That's your 1.0 difference in adjusted net yards per passing attempt number. And logic tells you if throughout a 17 game season, if that's your ending number of a 1.0 differential or greater, then you're probably going to be in the playoffs, and you're probably going to at least give you a decent shot at getting out of the wild card round, assuming that you don't get a bye or whatever there. So I think a lot of focus needs to be, yes, the focus needs to be on Aaron Rodgers, but if we are to assume that Aaron Rodgers' return and then the addition of Mike McCarthy is only going to have a minimal better impact at best, then I think that we need to hyper focus a little bit more on the strides that the defense can make. And if Patrick Graham can impact this thing as people hope, that's where the hope's going to come from as the season rolls on, of this team not only potentially getting into the playoffs, but maybe finally getting past the first round.
To preface this, these are things we hear from coaches everywhere each time of year, especially for new coaching staffs. But one of the big points of emphasis, as you said, was communication. Graham talked about getting on the same page with his guys. Alex Highsmith, Peyton Wilson talked about the need to communicate, improve that, and consistently be on the same page. And so I think Pittsburgh did make some strides there last year compared to that mess that was the end of 24. But still, I'm sure some things that can be improved upon. And then Graham spent a lot of time talking about connecting with players. And that's kind of a thing we don't talk about too much because it happens behind the scenes. But if you want guys to buy in, especially for a new coach, it's about connecting, not just saying, okay, do this, do that, here's the scheme, but the why behind it, the motivation to get these guys to truly buy in, and just connecting and being on the same page and having a trust and belief factor in each other, Graham and his players and the players in Graham. And Graham also, I mentioned this, has a sociology degree from Yale. And I think that's kind of one of those hidden soft skills that really will help Graham connect with players, how guys think and act, and how to connect with guys, which is different from one man to another. And so that's going to be a real big mission for Graham this time of year, is creating that culture and buy-in, because I'm sure these guys are a little, I don't want to say skeptical, but it's new. If you're an Alex Highsmith, if you're a TJ Watt, all I've known is Mike Tomlin, his defense and their style and how they go about things. Here's this new guy coming in. How am I going to respond to that and adjust to that? And so the impetus is on Graham to create that buy-in, make it seamless. And I think Graham has the soft skills to accomplish that.
Look, is this it? On paper, with everybody healthy, is this a talented defense?
Sure, it is. But the defense, it has to prove that. Last year was obviously a lot of high expectations, even set by Mike Tomlin, floating his potentially historic defense, which became a running joke. They were the butt of that joke throughout the year. And so it's really about proving they're as talented as they say and as they appear on paper, and really putting that into practice.
And it's up to Patrick Graham. I mean, once again, this is Patrick Graham's show now. Has Patrick Graham had, it's hard to quantify across all the years, but this has to be one of the more talented, player by player units that Patrick Graham's had the opportunity to be the DC of, right?
Yeah, with the Raiders, obviously he was really under-resourced. He's had some talented Giants defenses, and he had some really good Patriots groups. I'm trying to think when he was DC for those units, but he has not had probably a unit this talented in quite a while, at the very least. Maybe never had a unit this talented, and it's going to be on him to maximize this. You make the really good point that this is going to fall on Graham. There's not going to be any sort of question who's responsible for this. The responsibilities, offense, defense, are very clear in Pittsburgh. Mike McCarthy runs the offense, Patrick Graham runs the defense, and those guys will be held to account based on the results, good or bad.
Right. And once again, I think Patrick Graham, he won't, he certainly won't. You talk to coordinators and coaches, you hear coaches talk all the time. Sometimes you're only good as the talent that you have. And look, there won't be the excuse of assuming everybody stays healthy for a good section of time. Talent shouldn't be the issue here. Once again, I think Patrick Graham, and we roll back. We talked about offseason additions and coaching staff, and how James Campen really seemed to be one of our favorite ads when it comes to the offseason and the coaching staff additions and all like that. Patrick Graham certainly has the opportunity to really make a mark right out of chute when it comes to this unit and the talent that he has.
Yeah, he's a good coach. I like the hire, so go out there and prove it. That's going to be the bottom line. Thought from the player standpoint, Peyton Wilson had an interesting, revealing comment about his role and needing to really expand his role, not just in snap count, but helping out Patrick Queen more. And I forget the exact quote that Peyton Wilson said. I don't have it in front of me. Apologize. But he just said, basically, I put too much on Patrick Queen's plate. He was in charge of everything, making all the calls, all the time, all situations, even when he was exhausted out there. He was doing it all, and I got to take a little off of his plate this year and be able to help him out when help is needed. And so it's a big year for both those guys, for the entire inside linebacker room. But Peyton Wilson talking about some things he has to do that'll help himself and also help Patrick Queen.
And look, if you want to talk specifically both against the run and against the pass, where this team needs to be better, we've talked about in the past, up the middle, up the spine, right? So we do have to see Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson take a next step forward in not only play against the run, but in opportunities against the pass overall, because they're going to be playing a big role in how good this defense can be, assuming everybody stays healthy.
And that's why I've given maybe a little more grace to Patrick Queen than others. I'm still, waiting to really. I'm not counting out Patrick Queen, and maybe that's the best way to phrase that, because I think he's a really tough dude. I think he's an extremely durable dude. I think he does some of the intangible and behind the scenes things that we don't always talk about. Does he need to play better? Absolutely. He can't continue this really roller coaster ride of a season that he had last year. You want to see the missed tackle rate improve. You want to see some more splash plays and takeaways. You want to see some more sacks. He came really close to a half dozen sacks last year where the ball got out just ahead of time, sometimes because he missed an opportunity or sometimes just because the ball got out to an open receiver. But I'm still buying into Patrick Queen and his ability and talent, and hopefully whatever tweaks get made to the scheme, whatever progression that Peyton Wilson can make that maybe will take a little off Queen's plate, whatever tweaks that Graham has for him, can produce a good year for Patrick Queen and a contract year.
Yeah, he needs it. He needs to do it, and they need him to do it. Yeah.
Yep. Well said.
And then Pat, as Peyton Wilson said, it would be nice to be able for him to maybe alleviate some of the calls and communication and all for Patrick Queen. Maybe that'll help Patrick Queen play a little bit faster, and especially later in games when he is exhausted from having to play so much.
Right. He was a better player in Baltimore when he was able to do less of the air traffic control and wear the green dot, and he'll still wear the green dot in Pittsburgh, you would assume, this year. But if somebody can help him out a little bit, maybe not always in making calls, but just communication, who knows? It can take a lot of forms in terms of what Wilson can do. But Wilson himself has to be out there for all the base snaps. He's not been a base 3-4 player, and he needs to be able to show that he can play the run to be a most situations type of a guy.
Agreed. All right. I don't think we learned too much about the defensive side of football, at least from the way the reporting came from really the one day of OTAs that was reported on so far. So maybe we'll learn a little bit more throughout this OTA process, kind of different roles and schematics and things along those lines, but especially closer to training camp.
And from that open period, just based on my experience in training camp, it's a little harder to suss out the defensive, who's with the ones, because they're not, when an offensive line shows up and a quarterback shows up, it's easy to say, okay, here's your first string left tackle. It's a little harder to do that with the defense whenever they're kind of broken up into safeties and corners and they're all kind of scattered about. So it's a little harder to get a read on that. Plus, there's just less battles with the defensive side of the ball in terms of first string starter than you have for the offense right now. Graham did mention about being in nickel a lot and 5 defensive backs. I think maybe some are interpreting that as Pittsburgh will always be, or 90% of the time, be out there with 5 DBs. We'll see, because even last year they were majority sub-package because they're in nickel more than they are in base. And so I don't want to read too much into that comment, but I have mentioned Graham's experience with Nate Hobbs and what he did with the Raiders, where they were a really sub-heavy team 90+% of the time. And so we'll keep an eye on if that carries over into Pittsburgh.
All right. What about Danny Crossman? How about we talk about some special teams?
Don't got to twist my arm to do that, although not a ton of information there. I mean, there was some decent answers in terms of, Carson Bruner, expecting him to continue to be a stalwart on special teams. Travis Homer put his hand in the pile, kind of a guy that is willing to, obviously he's really been on rosters the last 2-3 seasons because, and almost exclusively because of his special teams value. A guy like Caden Weegan, a rookie transitioning to the NFL. The NFL kickoff rules, much different than the college game, the adjustment there, but all things that Crossman has to teach and get a guy like Weegan acclimated to so he can be at his best and prove his value and worth to the team.
All right, somebody else going to have to prove their value on special teams. Eli Heidenreich, and it sounds like he's going to get every opportunity. Potentially not ball in the hands, because obviously Caden Weegan, they're going to lean a lot on him to be the return guy based on his skill set. I thought it was interesting. Crossman talking about kind of the differences in specifically like the punting game at the NFL level, but overall that when it comes to Weegan specifically, that he's got the skill set that they expect to be able to translate nicely into the NFL game. And then talking about Heidenreich, I mean, what can he do to help on special teams, whether it be protection, whether it be coverage, potential, second kickoff return guy potentially back there. Who knows? But and I said this coming right out of the draft, man, they need to give Eli Heidenreich, at least give him an opportunity to make this team in several different areas. And it sounds like that will indeed, at least on the special teams side of the football, come to fruition here as we click off the days on the calendar.
Crossman says on Heidenreich, he's a guy that's going to get a look as a coverage player, as a protection player, and as a return player. And so that multifaceted role, which is how a lot of 7th-round picks make it. You could probably say similar about Robert Spears-Jennings, although not as a returner in all likelihood, but as a coverage guy, protection guy. So no surprise there, but I think Heidenreich certainly has the background, the skill set to make his case.
All right.
And he also mentioned, Crossman did, that Cameron Johnston, still only the punter on the roster right now, is in good shape.
Why wasn't he asked about the idea? One question I would have tried to shoehorn in there is, will this team add another punter?
It's a worthwhile question, although I can almost guarantee you his answer of that is above my pay grade. I don't decide who gets brought in. I just coach the guys who are here, and Johnston's still the only one. OTA is probably not a lot of punting happening. They have the machines too that can simulate that for drills and things like that. So I still think a second punter will get added, but been saying that for a little bit, so we'll see what happens. But Crossman saying, quote, he's in a really good place on both in terms of the injury history that Johnston has. Physically, I don't see any after effects from the surgery, and mentally, he's getting better and better every week. The last couple of weeks have been outstanding, and hopefully it continues trending in that direction. So even though Johnston is coming off, I think he had another knee injury last year, didn't punt a ton last year, and so his leg's probably a little fresher to kind of be used throughout the spring.
All right, we'll see if they end up adding a punter or not. But that was the only key takeaways I think from Crossman. They're not going to mess really overall with Chris Boswell and his routine throughout the offseason there. They obviously take that into account, and especially someone that's been kicking as long and successful as he has.
Yeah, and the point there is that in recent years, when Boswell worked with Danny Smith, that Bos really wouldn't kick until later in the year, until June, to really keep his leg fresh throughout the season. It seems like Crossman's okay with continuing that. And by the way, did you see Danny Smith's intro in Tampa Bay yesterday?
Yeah.
Just classic Danny Smith. So, it hurts. It hurts the soul a little bit, but there are obviously areas that Pittsburgh still needs to get better under a new special teams coordinator. Smith's units were really poor in the return game, especially on kick returns. So hopefully Crossman can provide that. And if the results are better, then you'll take good results over the fun media clips of a coach talking.
Yeah, man, we need some more impact plays from the special teams units moving forward. Kickoff, forced fumbles, pinning them back, longer returns. We need to see this unit, and they definitely can play a role in potentially winning a game or two if that unit is better than we've seen the last couple of years.
No
Punting,
question.
all of it,
Anything from any of the coordinators? I mean, Cross we talked about, Graham we talked about. Anything kind of going back to Angelico that stuck out to you that we didn't address in our offensive discussion?
No, just the fact him saying you can never have too many quarterbacks, yada yada. They'll figure out a way to get the reps they need for those four quarterbacks there. I view Angelico's look when you look at all the coordinators put together, which one, rolling back to what I said about Patrick Graham. Patrick Graham has the ability to make the biggest impact to me when it comes to quote unquote coordinators. I mean, obviously Mike McCarthy is going to be ahead of the offense and all like that. But I think pound for pound, Patrick Queen, when it comes to the coordinator hires, the three of them has the ability to make the biggest impact when it comes to those three. Angelico's going to be more of a facilitator, a conduit, a helper, quarterbacks, but his impact, more of the impact's going to come from Mike McCarthy, obviously, and Aaron Rodgers.
Sure, of course. And McCarthy, your game day play caller, but Angelico is going to have a really big role in game planning and formulating that plan for McCarthy, who's got a lot on his plate. And so, Angelico is going to have a big say and role in the offensive output.
All right. And we already mapped throughout this process the 4 or 5 players that talked. I think we kind of covered what all those guys had to say. We covered what the coordinators had to say. We've broken down the takeaways at least from the early OTAs. Anything else related to what has transpired?
No, I think it covers it well. Obviously, just one day, and so you want to just take it for what it is, just one practice and probably a half-hour window from the media to report on some of those things. And obviously, I'm eager to get to training camp and really open this thing up and talk about really what we're seeing and how this team is proceeding. But that's still a little ways away.
All right, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but what do you think about the whole international game talk about 8 to 10 games and where it could potentially go from there?
Yeah, they moved the cap from 8 to 10 in terms of what the NFL can play as a league, and so that is part of the NFL's continued global trend, and also really more importantly, the NFL, and this is voted on by the owners, by the way, this is not a unilateral decision by Roger Goodell, voted that teams can no longer protect any games that may be viewed as an international contest. For example, the Jaguars protected their game against Pittsburgh in Jacksonville this year from being moved to an overseas game in London, perhaps. And so no longer is that allowed, which means for Pittsburgh in 2027, there's a decent chance they're going to play internationally again with the cap going up, and they have 9 home games next year. So it'll likely be one of those international games will be a quote-unquote home game, potentially in Mexico City. For the Steelers, they could not protect that against any opponent. The schedule is the schedule that allowed the NFL to have the most marquee matchups overseas, and really, the belief is that eventually teams will play at least one international game every single year, and that's going to be just kind of the way that it goes. And I'm going to call it now, even though it's not that big of a prediction. The NFL will have a Super Bowl internationally within the next decade. I know they just announced Nashville for 2030, and so they're booked through then. But I think by, we'll call it 2036, they'll play one Super Bowl overseas. I know the NFL would love to do that and take the biggest game globally.
And before even that happens, I'm going to predict that you're going to see teams, once they get to an 18-game schedule, to have to play one home and one away game internationally as well too. So what you're going to get, what I think this is headed towards, is 8 true home games, 8 true away games, and then one home game and one away game technically for each team being played internationally. What my biggest fear is, and I think it would be absolutely stupid, is to mess with the division games of, you've got to let both teams have 2 home and a home and away against each of their divisional teams in their own stadium and not internationally. I think that would be absolutely foolish. Look, I'm not the right person to talk about good, bad, indifferent when it comes to international games because I don't go to games. I have no want to go to games. I have no, nothing. I understand the frustration from those that do go to games and even those that go to road games. We talked about the whole New Orleans situation. We talked about games down south for Southern Steeler fans and all like that. I'm the wrong look. They could tell me that these two teams are going to line up and play in a parking lot in Pensacola, Florida, and I'm probably going to watch that NFL game. Even if it starts at 5:30 Pacific time, I'm probably going to have the TV on, regardless of what the NFL game is. So I'm the wrong person to ask about that. But I would just prepare yourself for. Obviously, we're going to see this go to 10 international games, and not too far behind that, you're going to see teams play at least one international game, and then before this league gets to playing an international Super Bowl, I think you're going to see, like I said, an 18-game schedule where teams have to play one road and one technically one home, one away game internationally. And if you like that, fine. If you don't, you better get ready for it.
Yeah, that's probably a fair prediction, and that makes a lot of sense. I wonder when the NFL will go to 18 games. I know it's something the NFL wants. It's something that's not really. I thought they would have pushed harder for it by now. I know Goodell has
Next
said they.
CBA, I think.
Are you going to wait that long?
Yeah, I think they'll have to.
I mean, they didn't have to do it to go to 17. Was that part of the CBA to go to 17? Yeah, maybe it was. But I think the NFL would love to do it sooner. I know that Goodell has cited the NFLPA in their transition in leadership as one reason why they haven't engaged in those talks seriously and too in depth. So yeah, maybe they wait. But either way, it's going to happen sooner than later, probably within no later than 5 years from now. And more NFL, the better. By the way, Dave, getting a little piece of news here. We have a jersey number change.
Mm-hmm.
Malik Harrison has apparently changed his jersey from number 50, which he wore last year in Pittsburgh, to number 39, which he wore at Ohio State. So he'll take his college digits of 39.
Uh-oh, that's not a great sign, is it? Or is it?
Well, typically I would say 39 is not a great number for an inside linebacker, but it is his college number, and he's choosing to change it. So I assume he's doing it on his own volition, and so it'll look a little unusual out there. But on last linebacker in the 30s for Pittsburgh, but it is his college number, and I assume that's why he's taking it.
All right, interesting number switch there. Back one final note on the on potentially 18-game schedule before the CBA is due to be renegotiated and all like that. If indeed we end up seeing an 18-game schedule, there's no way, in my opinion, that doesn't happen without creating bigger rosters. In other words, the 53 going to like 56 or something like that. Then obviously maybe the practice, because the NFLPA is going to want more jobs. They're going to want, this is an extra game. They're probably going to want an additional bye week in there as well too. So this just won't, at least I don't know. The NFLPA doesn't have the best track record, but to me, this just won't be an iron fist coming down with it's going to be 18 games, deal with it. There's going to have to be some give back on the NFL to the NFLPA on roster size and bye weeks and things along those. I can't imagine an 18-game schedule without 2 bye weeks and without at least a 56-man roster.
Yeah, that would make the most amount of sense. And then I think it also would eventually put the Super Bowl, would that be after President's Day? I forget. It would make that basically a holiday, which is what people have wanted for a long time. So that would all make a lot of sense. And I just wonder on the particulars, would it go from 53 to 55? Would practice squads also expand? All that kind of stuff are good questions to find out down the road.
All right. I think we got a Super Bowl coming up in Nashville at some point now too, right?
Yeah, like I said, when I mentioned the Super Bowl going international, at some point, my prediction, they just awarded the Super Bowl, was it 64? I think in Nashville in 2030, and that's the most recent one. And so they hosted the draft a couple of years ago. We didn't write about it. Maybe we probably should have in hindsight. Art Rooney, back around the draft, was asked about would Pittsburgh ever host the Super Bowl, and basically Rooney said that's probably not going to happen. He would love it to, of course, but he is anti-dome. He will never put a dome, never build a stadium with a dome in Pittsburgh. And so that basically takes Pittsburgh out of the running to host a Super Bowl, because if you're a cold weather team, the NFL wants to have a dome in case there is really inclement weather. And so even though Pittsburgh hosted the draft, they probably will never get to host a Super Bowl.
All right, our own Ross McCorkle lives in Nashville, right?
He does.
So I don't know. Maybe we'll be sending Ross to do some work at the Super Bowl whenever that rolls around. Hopefully, the Steelers will be in contention to be in a Super Bowl.
I was going to ask you, make your prediction: 2030 Super Bowl 64. If I have that right, just pick some teams, and we'll revisit this if you're right.
Oh, you want me to pick? Oh, that's quite a few years away. What do I want?
Yeah, we're not holding you to this here. This is
Yeah, you
not feet
will.
to the fire. I mean, yes, but I'm saying
all
that
right.
just to get you to answer.
Steelers versus.
Oh, you're gonna pick Pittsburgh? Okay.
Yeah, why not? Right?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Steelers versus. Let me roll down the list here. Steelers versus San Francisco.
Okay, interesting for 2030. I will say, oh God, I'm not even sure where I want to go here. I'll say Jaguars versus what NFC team do I want to pick? Jaguars versus, let's just have fun here. Jaguars versus Panthers. Got to think a couple years down the road. Lawrence and Bryce Young. Yeah, not exactly the NFL's probably ideal Super Bowl matchup, but there you go.
All right. Only hold me to that if I'm right. I'll make sure to dig this back up if indeed that comes.
Steelers, Niners. Any reason for the Niners? Is Purdy still the quarterback in 2030?
Yeah. I think Purdy's still the quarterback and coming into still having success and all.
All right, good deal. Okay, the Saints. I could have picked the Saints too. I might revise that. I'm gonna revise that and say Saints, Jaguars for Super Bowl. The Saints. I don't know. They find a way to make it work. All right, Dave. Anything else? Anything else
no,
here?
Not a thing other than some emails, maybe.
Let's get through some reader emails and close out today's show.
All right, Paul Brown writes in, "Hi, Dave and Alex. With the Aaron Rodgers and Chris Boswell deals finalized, I believe the Steelers need to prioritize long-term extensions for Darnell Washington and Joey Porter Jr. Despite the lack of current buzz, Washington has shown elite blocking and significant receiving upside that we have yet to fully realize. Securing him now avoids the risk of entering the season without a deal for such a foundational young talent." Love to hear your thoughts on this, Paul. I don't know what more we have to say or haven't said about this so far. I think of all the guys of potential extensions moving forward past this point, and now that they have Boswell done, I think that the two likeliest guys to get done obviously are Joey Porter Jr. and Darnell Washington. Alex and I talked entertained thoughts of what maybe Nick Herbig and Darnell and not Darnell, Benton. Might be, it's not impossible for those two guys to get done. As I sit here right now, I'll be surprised if Benton and Herbig get done.
Why would you be surprised on Benton getting done? I'm just curious.
I think as the conversation we had, I think it might be in his best interest to bet on himself versus what, potential market value and guaranteed money might be. Okay. And looking ahead to the way too far ahead at the potential defensive tackle class and how Benton might be attractive to, even front teams. And I'll be surprised. Not that it can't happen. I think I've made that pretty clear. In fact, I think of Benton and Herbig, I think there's a higher probability of getting Benton done than there is Herbig. But I think at a score, I'll be at in my gut tells me to be surprised if either Benton or Herbig gets done. So that leaves Washington and Porter as the most likely to get done moving forward.
Okay, fair. Yeah, I'm with you on the top two.
But Paul, I don't know, maybe you missed some episodes or whatnot, but I think those have been. Disagree with me if I'm wrong, but I think we've come to the conclusion that those are two most likely guys to get done, right?
Yeah, I felt a little skeptical or hesitant on Washington. I've kind of warmed back up to the idea. Like I went from Washington going to get extended before Tomlin resigned to I'm not quite sure how it's all going to fit with the new coaching staff too. They're probably going to extend Washington, and then McCarthy will be able to make the two tight ends work and wants to. So I think the odds are pretty good. Plus, that contract's not going to cost that much money. It's going to be a pretty economical deal.
All right, Jordan Pearsall writes in, "What's up, Dave and Alex? I went to the draft and had a great time, even got to walk around on the field." He says, "I have 3 hot takes for you." He says, for Will Howard to have any remote chance to be the Steelers' long-term franchise quarterback, Aaron Rodgers would have to suffer a season-ending injury with at least 7 games left, which would allow Will to do enough to hold off Aller in the 2027 draft class. His number 2 hot take: if Aaron Rodgers plays all 17 games, it would be malpractice if the Steelers pass on a true first round quarterback without even seeing Aller play a regular season snap. Number 3 hot take: if the Steelers win a playoff game, we could be watching this front office wait for him once again next year for one final season. All right, number 1 hot take. Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. Look, as we mentioned a few, or I have, the window for Will Howard, whatever that window is, ends up being for playing time and really kind of specifically to probably 2026. It feels like he's going to have to hope that he gets some sort of opportunity and at least more than a handful of games. And he points out about 7 games left and all. So would you agree for Will Howard to have any remote chance to be the long-term franchise quarterback past 2026, he would probably have to have at least 7 games to prove his mettle?
Yeah, it's so hard on the particular 7 games, 4 games, 11 games. I don't know. I've just made the point that this is probably Howard's best and clearest chance to start had Rodgers not return, and that path now becomes more difficult. But I just want to see this guy in a game and take a snap. Like
Me
that's just
too.
kind of my and I understand these are all important questions, and next year, in the offseason, Pittsburgh will be staring themselves with some really important questions, I assume, in terms of who's our 27 starter. Could there be a scenario in which Rodgers plays this game again?
Oh,
God help us, but potentially, I won't completely close that door. And then the questions about uh, Aller, I keep wanting to say Aller, and I'm catching myself here. Aller and Howard and whatever free agents and the draft and all those things. But I just want to take it one step at a time and get this guy into training camp and in a preseason game and kind of go from there. So that's just kind of my mindset on everything quarterback related.
all right, Ben Hallam writes in, "Hi, David Knox. Ben from Cambridge, England. I'm worried with the whole Aaron Rodgers saga that we have been concentrating too much on the offensive side of the ball. Ever since Ben retired, we've been spending more time trying to fix the offense while the D has got steadily older and relying on older, overpaid mercenaries to patch the leaks. Rodgers coming back compounds this because we are more likely going to have to spend another high round draft pick on a quarterback because we won't know what we have in Aller or Howard." He says, "Listening to Patrick Graham talk doesn't fill me with confidence either. He sounds more worried about not rocking the boat too much rather than stamping his vision of what his defense should be." That's an interesting take. "There's no point in the offense taking a step forward if the defense takes 2 steps back." All right, Ben, hopefully you enjoyed my talk about Patrick Graham and the potential impact that he can have, and how really maybe we should be focusing more on how good or how much improvement this defense can make in 2026, and how potentially that being the biggest component about whether or not this team can end up making the playoffs, and if they do make the playoffs, making at least being a team that one could think could at least win 1 playoff game, maybe 2, and who knows from there. So I think we pretty much have addressed a little bit of his concerns in this email. I wonder what he says, listening to Patrick Graham talk doesn't fill me with confidence either. He sounds more worried about not rocking the boat too much rather than stamping his vision on what his defense should be. Do you get any of that?
It's one of those things we'll have to watch play out because we just haven't gotten to see much of it. We've heard from Graham a couple of times, and they've not, they're just taking the field now to begin OTA. So let's watch it play out. I mean, obviously, I think structurally we believe the defense will be the same in its foundation, but there are still many tweaks and adjustments and things, game plan specific things across along the way, I should say, that will test and really prove Graham's mettle. I mean, I think McCarthy made it clear whenever he was hired, even before Patrick Graham was brought in, that he wanted to keep the defense like a Steelers defense. And so I think Graham is having to follow that directive. But as I said, Graham has run every system and every scheme and every zone, man, 3-4-4-3, all the particulars. And so I think the directive was we're going to keep this defense generally the same. It's a veteran group. It's a talented group. We're not going to rock the boat too much. But it's still, Graham can still certainly put a stamp on things, in-game adjustments, wrinkles, all those things. So I'm not concerned or surprised by Graham keeping things in big picture, broad strokes, the same, because that's what I think McCarthy wanted his DC, whoever the hire would be, to do. But we'll let Graham run the show, and I'm sure he'll get to make his mark on this defense. I don't have any concern or reservation about that.
All right, Ben. Now I know you wrote this before. Well, obviously, we had this conversation earlier, but give me your thoughts on us talking more about the defense and Patrick Graham and potential impact that we had during the show. He also says, P.S. When you're talking about the London games, it's pronounced Tottenham Stadium, despite the rules of the English language suggesting it should be pronounced Tottenham. All right, so I got me an English lesson there in today's show. Larry Griffith writes in, what do you all think about a Juju reunion? If our wide receiver 1 or 2 goes down, we may have a problem. Some inexpensive veteran depth could be wise. He played college ball with Pittman and would be a good 3rd, 4th receiver, good mentor for Bernard, and fit well in with the wide receiver room. If he gives us his stat line from last year, he would have been the 2nd best receiver on the Steelers in 2025. What would you estimate a contract for Juju to be? How likely do you think adding him or another similar veteran is? All right. We did forget to mention the whole, and we wrote about it, so minor storyline. Michael Pittman evidently asking Juju when he's going to make a comeback to Pittsburgh.
At least said coming home. I assume that meant Pittsburgh and not USC, since they're both former Trojans. But yeah, we didn't talk about it because it's a very minor point. I mean, I don't know what it would cost for Juju. It wouldn't cost much. I just don't have any interest. I mean, he's a worse version of Pittman. If Pittman went down, then maybe. But Juju's always had bad knees. He was having knee issues in his first stint in Pittsburgh. He's not that old yet because he was so darn young whenever he came out of college. He's getting up there. He's going to be 30 in November. So I'm going to pass on Juju.
I'm going to pass as well too. I would say it would make a great Reader's Digest story. You're not old enough to even know what Reader's Digest is.
I've been in some doctor's offices that have some of those magazines laying around.
All right. Other than it being a fun story, I don't think you're going to see them go down this road whatsoever. I think Pittman's having just a little bit fun there. No, I will be absolutely surprised if it gets any further than Pittman doing what he did on social media.
Agreed.
Let's see if I can get one more in here. Best worst case scenario from Tim. Tim writes in, best worst case scenario is such a Dave-ism. Not even sure I understand it, but I love it. So I'll say my best worst case is something like Rodgers' injury, 5 or 6 wins, but Howard or Aller showing enough promise to have a top 10 pick, but not need a quarterback. That's way better than just 8-9 or 9-8 with Rodgers starting 17 games. So at least Tim kind of got my Dave-ism, and only I could think of probably something of a best worst case scenario, but I think it's an interesting kind of way to look at things. And once again, I think, and this is not all Steelers fans, obviously, but I just think the general statement about this whole season and Aaron Rodgers and the age of the defense and everything that goes along is people just, I think the biggest fear once again, I'm not going to throw everybody in one box here, is just that, all right, it's going to be Aaron Rodgers for 17 games. Yeah, he's probably maybe he can get them into the playoffs, and maybe at best they win a playoff game, and we don't see much, if any, of Howard or Aller, and this team, even if they get one playoff win, they're bounced. There's not much to cheer about other than raising the playoff win banner again. They end up drafting 21st, 24th, something like that. There's not much. They didn't get a look at Howard or Aller, and then they're faced with maybe the quarterback class not being as good as everybody expects it to be,
Or
and then
being so good they all go in the top 5.
or being, it takes an arm and a leg to go up and get them. And then what do we have to look forward to in 2027 and 2028 as far as this team potentially competing? That's just my general biggest fear of what most, and once again, I'm not speaking for everybody here, but generally that feels like what everybody's worried about the most.
Sure. And that fear is a realistic scenario that could certainly play out. And it's not one of those 1% chance events. It's maybe the favorite to occur, where Rodgers has been a tough and durable quarterback. He plays out the year. Pittsburgh wins 9-10 games. You pick 19th next year. The quarterbacks are gone. And you're kind of then going to 27, still unsure about who's your guy, what's your long-term future, even your short-term answers. So yeah, that is a valid scenario, and it's the reason why you and I ultimately said we preferred Rodgers not to return, even though we both expected, and you especially always expected Rodgers to come back.
Mm-hmm. All right.
That was a very, very victory lap. On that. Fair.
I mean, I get so many pats on the back from you that I take them in stride nowadays. But no, I appreciate that. But look, I don't think I was going out on any limb, but I did stay constant in being in the 90% or greater, I think, realm of Aaron Rodgers throughout all this. I'm not shocked that it turned out the way that it did. I think the biggest shock overall, and where I was most wrong, was heading into the offseason thinking, they ain't going to draft no quarterback. And then it only took the Carson Beck, and then who was the next one in? Peyton, I think, was the next quarterback.
Cole Peyton, the visit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And then I quickly tapped the brakes and said, maybe they are going to draft a quarterback there. But even after drafting a quarterback, it didn't really change my opinion too much. It was, if Aaron wanted to come back, he was going to come back with the Steelers, and specifically after Mike McCarthy was hired to be the new head coach. Now, had it been any other coach other than Mike McCarthy, my percentage would have went down there. But I'm not going to. In other words, I'm not going to take a huge victory lap on that, other than being more right than you, which I would never rub that in your face at all. Ever.
Your humility is your greatest strength, Dave. I do wonder what would have happened, what the story would have looked like had any other head coach been hired. Had it been whoever, Chris Shula, Anthony Weaver, Brian Flores, would Rodgers have come back? I just one of those what ifs that we'll never get an answer to.
Let's just hope that we're not having this Aaron Rodgers discussion this same time next season, or anywhere close to it.
Just take a guess. Had any other head coach besides Mike McCarthy been hired, would Rodgers have returned?
All right. Who would it have been that maybe he had? I guess. What?
Okay. Assume quote unquote worst case for him, where he had no relationship with the head coach or the OC hire.
It would have been tough to envision.
I think he would have done it. That's my guess. I think he wanted to come back and he had fun. He wanted to come back and have one more season.
Look, the moment he threw that pick six as his last pass attempt and exited the game, and that there was no way Aaron Rodgers was going to let himself go out with that being the last highlight of him.
Yeah, that's one reason why I think he would have come back no matter the head coach. Obviously, McCarthy and Camp and all that makes it easier, but I think Pittsburgh still would have wanted him back. I think ownership, Omar Khan, would have wanted him to come back, but we'll never know.
All right, I'm proud of ourselves for being able to transition and not make this show a lot about Aaron Rodgers. Overall, I think we've done a great, because I talked on the last show, how are we going to get away from talking about so much Aaron Rodgers here? But let's talk about, because we have failed to talk about Aaron Rodgers so much, there's a lot of people, I guess, wondering now if Aaron Rodgers is going to go back to weekly appearances on the Pat McAfee show. I don't know where this is coming from. I think most of it's 93.7 The Fan, claiming that there's smoke or hearing or whatever, yada, yada. But let's entertain that thought to end things out here. Do you think he will, could, should, needs to?
Doesn't need. No, he doesn't need to. I have no
He might
idea
need
what his
to.
plan. Why would he need to?
For him. He might need to.
I would be content with keeping it as it was last year with no weekly McAfee appearance. I've not heard anything that he will. But Rodgers is speaking today. Maybe he'll get asked about it. So as much as we try to avoid Rodgers on this show, we're going to talk about him a lot probably on the Friday show. So apologies and fair warning on that.
I hope he does not make a weekly appearance on McAfee. I do expect him to make appearance 1 or 2 between now and the start of regular season. How do you think he'll be pressed, assuming he talks to the media today, about what the actual timeline, whether or not he was in town, how long he's been in town, when was the first time he got in town, and will he just say, that's none of your damn business, if asked something along those lines?
Probably yes to both. He'll be asked, and that sounds like the answer he'll give.
All right. I think they've already figured out what kind of ice cream he bought the other day. So
What did he get?
I think Brooke Pryor said butterscotch something or another.
Ooh, that's the journalism that we needed.
Yeah, journalism 101. All right, Alex, I think we did personally, I think this might have been our best show in about a week or two. But anyway, we'll let the listeners decide on that. You can follow me on Twitter. And thanks for all the feedback, people praying for me and all like that. Got a couple of those as well, too. Those prayers work. I'm feeling good. I think maybe you heard it in my voice today as well, too.
Yeah, you sounded chipper. Yeah. Whatever that dentist gave you, man, you were on some good stuff.
Yeah, and I don't like drugs, so I only hit the roof a couple times during that root canal there. So, all right. You follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the ad-free button. Follow the directions that way. Really looking forward to what awaits us on the Friday show as this team wraps up their first official sessions of OTA practices. And we'll recap what Aaron Rodgers did and didn't say and go from there. So I enjoyed it today, Alex. And until Friday, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.